Calvin Wazoo here, Richard from the channel Calvin Wazoo, bringing you another video and another installment in Frank Zappa, one album at a time. And as you saw from my little intro, it's a pretty chilly day here in Chicago. This morning when I woke up, it was minus 7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about minus 21 degrees Celsius. It is now just after noon, about 5 degrees above zero. Bright, sunny sky, looks so inviting outside. But, ooh, it's the kind of weather that when you breathe in through your nose, that sometimes the sides of your nostrils will stick together. They'll freeze closed. So actually I took the video yesterday. I have not been outside today. I don't think I'm gonna go out at all. So we'll get started here. Yes, another entry in the series Frank Zappa, one album at a time. And this time we're going to tackle 200 Motels. I wonder if I'll get a content strike because of that. Anyway, yes, 200 Motels. And I've got a lot of material to help me through this because there's a lot of backstory that goes into 200 Motels. And musically, it is really interesting and complex. I mean, there are these really dense orchestral pieces mixed in with, pop pieces, pure pop pieces, even, that you could qualify a little bit of rock and roll, etc. And it's kind of an absurd premise, but it's one that Frank had been working on for quite a while. You may hear me in future videos talk a little bit more about something that is called Project Object. And the notion is that all his material represent an object, and each individual installment is a project in that object. So throughout his catalog and everything he did, he had this grand vision, and everything he did fit into that image. It's kind of like looking at a painting. The object of the painting is framed by the size of the canvas, and then the individual items that are inside the composition of the piece of art are the different projects, I guess you could say, that create the entire whole. So 200 Motels, the album release, it came after the Fillmore East release of June 1971. The soundtrack was recorded in early 1971 and then was released later in the year in October 1971. Conceptually, this began much earlier, in particular right around the time of Weasels Rip My Flesh. The elements that would become the soundtrack and libretto, so to speak, of 200 Motels were already in development. And there was some more refinement in Chunga's Revenge, although Chunga's Revenge also, had some carryover from the Hot Rats sessions. And so did Weasels, I believe. But this is also about the time that you've got Flo and Eddie, Mark Volman and Howard Kalin, joining the Mothers. And this really helped Frank bring this idea to fruition. He had other ideas for, movie projects. There was Uncle Meat, but that never really, went anywhere. He had this grand vision for Thingfish that, did turn into a multi-record set, but it didn't fit it didn't turn into what he wanted, which was, a Broadway show. So there were these other kinds of projects that he was working on within the larger object, but they didn't come to fruition like 200 Motels did. And 200 Motels almost did not happen. I mean, there was a lot of chaos in the process. So by the fall of 1970, the Mothers were touring in Europe, and things were starting to come together. All the different pieces that, even in Bert Weenie Sandwich, you have elements of the little house that I used to live in the Holiday in Berlin suite. These elements were reworked into other pieces that later became part of 200 Motels. Now, I'm going to be relying a lot of other resources because there's a lot of stuff that I went back and looked up. So I'm not only going to be relying on one of my favorite resources for some of the information that I'm going to be presenting you found in the big note. I'm also going to be relying on this book here by Neil Slavin, Electric Don Quixote, so which he calls the definitive story of Frank Zappa. And I also went back and reviewed some material in Frank's autobiography to, again, get a little more background, particularly on his comments regarding orchestral stupidity. So anyway, the other thing about the band at this time, and when they were touring in Europe in the fall of 1970, is Frank really liked the band that he had at this time. That included Flo and Eddie, and others who were touring, because he believed that there was a musical relationship being established with all the musicians in the band beyond merely just getting along on the tour. That they were kind of buying in to this creative energy and development of material on the road. And which was probably a good thing, because by the time they got to England to begin recording and working on the film 200 Motels, they encountered lots of problems, not the least of which was relations with the local press, which was best described as being truculent. There were examples of press conferences, so to speak, in which like one reporter referred to Frank as Love. Says, "How you doing, Love?" And Frank, immediately say, "Don't call me by that. You do not refer to me in that way." And then he laid out a few other nuggets. He vacillated between being serious in terms of responding to the questions of the press corps, but then he also threw out some satirical daggers, such as this concept that he wanted to have in the movie 200 Motels, in which a reporter, and he was thinking about a specific reporter when he was reciting this, who was in the press corps, who was asking questions of him. And during the interview, he gets up from his chair and then puts a dummy of himself in the chair, and the reporter continues asking questions of the dummy. So he didn't have a lot of respect for the British music press corps, at the time. Then we get into, the studio, and the project begins, all right? So one of the issues is that people, especially the members of the orchestra, the London Symphony Orchestra, and others who were involved in the creation of the film, didn't know what it was about. And, in a way, how could they? Because all of it was being developed by Frank with the assistance of the band members, on the fly while they were on the road. And then he is bringing it up, trying to bring it all together, and under a nearly impossible schedule. And a lot of people had difficulty dealing with the urgency and the pressure that was hovering over them during the creation of the film. Now, there were those who, it didn't matter that much, mostly members of the Mothers, but also Ringo Starr was part of the cast. He played Frank Zappa in the film. He also played a character called Larry the Dwarf. And then there was Keith Moon, who portrayed a groupie nun. This part was originally offered to Mick Jagger, but he turned it down. And Ringo and Keith, the chaos didn't bother them. They had no trouble adapting to this at all. Now, MGM, which was going to be the label, or United Artists, it was United Artists. So United Artists was the record label behind the creation of the film and the soundtrack. They insisted on having a professional director assisting and working on the film. And that led to Frank. Frank hired the person, and that was this Tony Palmer. But he was hired as an assistant director, and Tony Palmer had a personality that conflicted with Frank's personality, and so there were tensions going on. And Frank talks about this with Neil Slavin, in this book, and I'm going to read that section. So Frank is telling Neil Slavin, well, I'm the one who hired him. He had a lot of problems during the making of the film. He was on the verge of a divorce. He had the flu, and he seemed to be a fairly ill-tempered individual even on a good day. I don't want to be unkind to him, but on the production of the film, he did two things which I will always remember. One, at the completion of principal photography, he had demanded of the producer that his name be left off the credits for fear that it would harm his career. And then, once the editing was started on the film, he decided he did want to have his name on the credits. And the other thing was, in a little fit of pique in the middle of production, Gail, Zappa, happened to be walking by and overheard him saying that he was threatening to erase all of the master tapes of the movie if something wasn't done to his satisfaction. So it was not easy working with him. Other things that were going on was the bass player. All right, Jeff Simmons was the bass player with the Mothers at that time, and he was working with everyone during rehearsals, but his girlfriend at the time was like, yeah, in his ear, telling him that, oh, you're a blues bass player. You need to be with a blues band. You need to be playing much more serious music. You shouldn't be playing this comedy music. And so, like, on the last day of rehearsal, Jeff Simmons walks off. He leaves. And incidentally, it's something I'll talk about later, Frank memorialized Jeff in the film. which is Frank's way with much of his material. When somebody makes a mistake or does something to him that gets under his skin, he memorializes it in music. So they brought in this other bass player, and that didn't last very long because of all the chaos that was going on. And he apparently left the studio nearly screaming, "I can't deal with this, I can't deal with this." So here they are getting ready to do their filming, and there's more information on that, but essentially they were going to be filming everything live with very little rehearsal. And they didn't have a bass player, and Frank said something to the effect, well, we're hiring the next person who walks through the door. And I don't know if it was literally right after Frank said that, but quite soon after Frank said that, Ringo's chauffeur walks in, and Ringo makes this mention that, well, first, all right, so the Ringo chauffeur walks in, and I thought I wrote his name down, and darn, I don't have remember what his name, Martin Lickert, or Martin Lickert, something like that, and walks in and was described as quite a fetching young man. He was wearing some psychedelic clothing, and he had this Liverpudlian accent that was quite nice, that everybody liked. And then so Ringo says, oh, guess what? He can play bass. So everyone else is going, So he's in the film. And he also got a credit as being part of the Mothers of Invention. Then there were this other fiasco that happened because of arcane contract and union rules with orchestras, in particular the London Symphony Orchestra. It was cheaper to rehearse the orchestra in a live performance in a concert venue than to rehearse them in the studio, because you had to pay them, I guess, the going wage or rate for a rehearsal, the same as a performance. But that wasn't quite true if the rehearsal was live. So they booked a concert in the Royal Albert Hall. And they sold something like 4,000 tickets. And, they spent a lot of money on promotion and also to, book the hall. But one of the orchestra members apparently was a member of the Salvation Army. And he snitched to one of the members of the Queen's arts establishment or something like that, that there were naughty parts in the script. And so that person canceled the show that already had 4,000 tickets sold, that they had already booked the venue. So then Frank had to refund all this money. They had to refund all the tickets, and essentially were not able to do the kind of rehearsing with the orchestra that Frank had wanted to do. And if you are already familiar with the score, the orchestral parts in 200 Motels is not easy. It's complicated music. In fact, Frank he deliberately was trying to create a sort of homage and a rendition or an interpretation of Edgar Varèse's pieces and to some degree Stravinsky with many of the orchestral musical passages. So all that's going on. And then the other issue is this was the first, I believe, or at least according to Frank, it was the first film that was shot on videotape first and then converted to 35 millimeter. Frank explaining that on videotape, you could do things with visual effects on videotape that you could not necessarily do on 35 millimeter film. And so that whole scenario was going down. It was shot in 7 days, the entire film and recording of the music, which almost all of the music was played live during the filming. It was edited in 11 days, and then about 3 months was taken to transfer the videotape onto film. And this was all done for a total budget of $679,000, which was under budget. And the script was 320 pages long. So about 1/3 of that wasn't shot at all. And I haven't published any, but I've written screenplays before. And roughly 1 page of script equals 1 minute. So a film time, that's, so if you've got a script that's roughly 110 pages, well, it's going to be roughly a 110-minute film. And so he had a script that was 320 pages long. And he really believed that if he had some more money and he had more time, I think he said something to the effect that if he had twice the budget, he could have produced a film that was 10 times better than what actually was released. And I've seen the film, and it's worth watching, but it's not that great of a film. The premise, if it had been executed the way that Frank really wanted to have it executed, it would have been a great film. But this whole scenario thing really prevented it from coming out in its best presentation. So that's kind of the background that went into the creation of the film. And so talking about the soundtrack, so this is probably the first record I ever bought when I started collecting again. Now, if you recall from some of my earlier videos, I talked about how I already had a record collection, but then I traded it in for compact discs in the 1990s because I was frequently moving and sometimes across the country, and records are heavy and take up a lot of room, and it was easier to move around with CDs. So, and I have this also on CD. So when I started collecting again, this was one of the first records I bought. So you can see the front cover, which is part of the poster that came with it. Then on the back, you can kind of see how here's the orchestra, and they're surrounded by, it's like a concentration camp fence covered with bird shit. And then, all the different percussionist instruments up here, and then the band would also be playing live. All right, here's the inside information about, the performers and other production credits information. So we talk about, right, there's the cheesy motel, because he had all these items on the set. Redneck Eats was a restaurant that was, in there, the cheesy motel, the town of Centerville. These were all going to be part of the film. And then there's the booklet, the certificate of its R rating. Here's the back cover, members of the cast. And then you can see Martin Lickert is listed under here as being part of the Mothers of Invention because he happened to walk through the door at the right time. And then there's, here's an image of the score. There's Ringo Starr as Frank Zappa. Here's Keith Moon as the groupie nun. There's the nun when she levitates to heaven. Here is Centerville, the set for Centerville, and Motorhead Sherwood and his Newts, which there are portions that were cut from the film. One of them being the dance of the Just Plain Folks, which was cut from the film. And who knows, there might be a video out there someplace in YouTube land. I actually didn't try and look it up. Here is the scene from, and I'll talk about this more, about I'm Stealing the Room suite that included this animated film called Dental Hygiene Dilemma, and which you'll see has a duck in here. More information about that in a moment. Here is Martin Lickert, so you can see, he was quite a fetching young man that everybody thought. Don Preston and others, Mark Volman and Howard Kalin during the Penis Dimension March, Ian Underwood and Ruth Underwood and the Orchestra. Jimmy Carl Black is Cowboy Burt. And then here's Frank working with the crew, etc. So those are the items that came with the album. Well, let's start talking about the tracks. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But some things to note is that the film score, all right, the soundtrack, has 4 suites, all right, that are made up of, different songs. Now, the opening is the Semi-Fraudulent Direct from Hollywood Overture, was just very grand, and it's got some spoken words in there. Flo and Eddie's voices are sped up, but you can hear the voracious cacophonic style, with the orchestra and how the percussive instruments are working into this, and the preciseness of the parts. And they seem to pull it off pretty well despite their lack of rehearsal. And then it goes into this song, The Mystery Roach, which is just got a solid groove, got a solid bass groove to it, and guitar. Then we go into the Dance of the Rock and Roll Interviewees, and then begins the first suite, which is This Town is a Sealed Tuna Sandwich. Because the storyline is about touring, and that touring can make you crazy. And there are a number of songs in this. There's the prologue, This Town is a Sealed Tuna Sandwich, the Tuna Fish Promenade. So you get these vocal parts intermingled with these very dense very complicated orchestral parts. Then the Dance of the Just Plain Folks in there. And then the reprise, This Town is a Sealed Tuna Sandwich. There's the Sealed Tuna Bolero. And then we get this country song of Lonesome Cowboy Burt. Lonesome Cowboy Burt with Jimmy Carl Black singing, I'm Lonesome Cowboy Burt, speaking at you. It's a pretty funny song. Then we get into side 2, which starts off with Touring Can Make You Crazy, Would You Like a Snack? And then we have the Redneck Eats, all right, which was a part of the set. And Centerville, I believe Redneck Eats did not make it into the film. And then Centerville, a real nice place to raise your kids up. Churches, and liquor stores. Then begins the Shove It Right In suite, which starts with She Painted Up Her Face. Then there's Janet's Big Dance Number, half a dozen provocative squats. Half a dozen provocative squats. Out of the shower, she squeezes her spots, brushes her teeth, sprays the deodorant up her twat. And then there is the Misterioso, closing with Shove It Right In. The whole, again, the premise of the film that musicians, and not just rock and roll musicians, but any musician on a touring group, when they're touring and they're in town, they're looking to hook up. And then Lucy's seduction of a bored violinist and postlude. Now, then the next side 3 starts off with the next suite, which is I'm Stealing the Room. All right, that has I'm Stealing the Towels, Dental Hygiene Dilemma, Does This Kind of Life Look Interesting to You? And Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And in this, there is a character, Jeff. Remember Jeff Simmons, the bass player, just walked off the set. He's being not attacked, but he's got his good conscience and bad conscience speaking to him about and working that theme, because Jeff is tired of playing all this comedy music and working for Frank Zappa. He eats, and he's taking the towels, because this is what touring musicians do. They steal the towels from the rooms. Frank had a huge collection of hotel keys that he had amassed while touring. But anyway, he's like sniffing the towel and having a hallucinogenic experience and smoking the mildew or whatever. And so the song Dental Hygiene Dilemma is this animated segment that gets into the film, which has an interesting history, which is talked about in here. So I wanted to share that with you. That film and that reference in the movie 200 Motels, that animated bit, was an allusion to a high school art project that Frank did. So what he did is the abstract film project that he did in high school was to paint on film, but clear celluloid was unavailable. So he needed to remove all the emulsion from the film so that he could then paint on it. And he was able to remove most of the emulsion. I guess they needed to use nitric acid in order to do that. And not all of it, some of it kind of clumped up and not all of it was removed. But then in the film that he used was a dental hygiene film, all right, that was created for dental hygienists. And apparently his art teacher was so impressed with the project that he sent it to, or he or she sent it and contacted Disney Studio without telling Frank about it, and actually took, it says here, We took my home movie down there and had a screening at Disney. They said, nice little boy, thank you very much for bringing your movie here. And that was the end of that. The other interesting thing that, the animation that was done for Dental Hygiene Dilemma in the film 200 Motels was done by Chuck Schwensen of Murakami Wolf, okay, and Cal Schenkel, all right? Cal Schenkel, also known as Calvin. Anyway, so Frank explained, when you've got someone like Calvin, you don't want to tell him everything you want to do because he's so creative. You just have to give him a rough idea. I specified items in the cartoon, like the duck, the mouth, the beer bottle, the ghosts floating through, and about 5 or 6 other elements that I thought would work with various things in the music, and the rest of it was just their imagination. And then Cal Schenkel said, Frank supplied a completed soundtrack except for effects, and we worked from that. I designed characters, background, setup, etc. Chuck directed and animated, except the hand-moved animated parts, which I did. We did it in 8 weeks. It was a lot of fun. It was the first, and unfortunately, except for a couple of minor other works, the last real animation I ever did. At the time, I took my reel all over Hollywood to all the animation houses, but nobody gave me any work from it. So yeah, it's kind of rough for them. So that's the that's the third suite, and then the final suite is the Pleated Gazelle suite, which includes first of all, we had the song Penis Dimension, which is the song is about Lonesome Cowboy Burt, commiserating over his issues with finding women or whatever. And the concept is, well, the reason is because of your penis dimension. Then we have What Will This Evening Bring Me This Morning? And then a nun's suit painted on some old boxes. Magic Fingers, which became a single, and it's just a crazy great song. Because, remember motels, especially cheaper motels, the beds had those vibrators where you put a quarter in the machine and, make the bed vibrate. And that's, one of the lines in there. Open up your pocketbook, get another quarter out, drop it in the meter, mama, time is running out. So that's the Magic Fingers. And then Motorhead's Midnight Ranch. And then here's another section that didn't make it into the film, and that's about the newts at Motorhead's Midnight Ranch. However, the reference does get mentioned in the Chunga's Revenge. So the story there with that. Then there's some other interesting vocal pieces and orchestral pieces. The lad searches the night for his newts. The girl wants to fix him some broth. And the girl's dream. The sopranos in some of the parts of the film, Frank wanted boy sopranos to be singing those parts. They ended up being sung by women. Somebody asked him, Frank, do you think it's appropriate to be trying to contract a boys' choir to sing these parts, given the content of the film? And Frank's reply was, well, you never know until you ask. And then the little green scratchy sweaters and corduroy ponce. Finally, we get the finale of the film, Strictly Gentile, which is a piece that is played on numerous occasions. It has been done by orchestral organizations, and Dweezil Zappa reportedly asked his father at some time, I'm not exactly sure, when in the discography, that the question was presented to Frank, but it was, what is your favorite piece that you have composed out of all your material? And Frank's reply was strictly genteel. So that's his favorite word. So there you have it. 200 Motels, the soundtrack. Crazy, semi-chaotic history behind, but the music and the orchestral bits in particular, but even the pop music bits are really fantastic. But the orchestral bits are, again, super, they're enjoyable, but they are very complicated and dense. And his vision, he pulled it off, despite the lack of what he wanted in terms of rehearsal. He still pulled it off. So it is really quite an accomplishment that this got turned into a film, despite the fact that it's a pretty bad film. But it got turned into a film, and the score was recorded, and totally amazing. So that's it on 200 Motels. Hope you enjoyed this. If you've got any other information or stories about 200 Motels, share them in the Down Under, please. And always remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.